I've been asked to spend a few minutes helping you prepare for the potential of needing to shelter in place. This is kind of an overview of all of the topics that are being presented today, not to take away from any of the other presenters, but because we know that repetition is the mother of learning. Many different causes exist that force people and families to have to choose between evacuation or sheltering in place. Sheltering in place means you live with what you have, period. No running to the grocery store, the gas station, the drugstore, Amazon.com, Walmart, etc. What you have is what you get to live with. But evacuation has its own set of challenges. Why would you want to shelter in place? Do you value privacy? How about a clean bathroom in your home versus one rarely, if at all, cleaned and shared by 100 or more people living in the same place in an evacuation center? My point is, if you have a few plans and supplies in place, you will be far more comfortable and probably a lot safer in your own home or even in a tent in your yard than in a mass evacuation shelter. Just look at the reports that came out of Hurricane Katrina in 2005. In December of 2018, the Department of Homeland Security published a 94-page report from the President's National Infrastructure Advisory Council, which recommends that all citizens of the United States prepare for extended periods of grid down, a catastrophic power outage, which they define as a regional or national event that interrupts electricity, gas, phone, internet service, etc., for a period that may extend for many months. Our present reliance on a stable power supply makes this extremely difficult and uncomfortable to comprehend or even think about. However, thinking about it and planning for the eventuality will make life much easier and more pleasant when it happens than ignoring it now and hoping it never happens. Mental attitude is critical. Your mind is your greatest tool for survival. If you're just getting started with preparing, you may feel like you're trying to drink from a fire hose. We've all been there. Don't give up, just get started. If you've been at it for a few years, Russell M. Nelson recently recommended that we prepare places of physical and spiritual safety and never stop preparing. No matter how prepared you think you are, you can always improve. Now, back to that fire hose. Sheltering in place is a subject that truly needs many hours of instruction for those who aren't already well on their way to being prepared for it. So in my few minutes, you'll just get a skim over the surface to help you get some ideas of where to start or areas you may need to improve upon. It's basically a global picture, an overview rather than the minutia. Whether you are new to preparing or have been at it for a while, recent events in our nation and the world may have made you feel somewhat like this poor elephant. Elephants never forget, or so I've heard. So remember, the best way to fight fear is to prepare yourself to meet the challenges that may come. Now, how do you eat an elephant? The answer, of course, is one bite at a time. Becoming prepared is a process that takes time and effort. You can't simply throw money out there and expect to be prepared with knowledge, skills, wisdom, fortitude, etc. It's very easy to feel or become overwhelmed by information, physical needs, and suggested skills. You cannot do everything at once. So, what do you do? Start by taking an accurate inventory of your stuff and your skills. More on this in a minute. Then sit down with your family, discuss your current situation after you have taken an accurate inventory of both stuff and skills. Third, set your priorities. Begin working on them and stick with them. Fourth, periodically reevaluate where you are versus where you want to be. Okay, so taking an inventory of all of your stuff is still a mighty big bite. Here are some suggestions for smaller bites. These are just suggestions. You may have different categories that you want to use for organizing your inventory. That's fine. Use the categories that make sense to you. For many years, the recommendation from numerous government and non-governmental organizations has been to have 72 hours. That's 3 days worth of food and water in some kind of easily transportable by you container, also called a 72-hour kit. The top two pictures are good ideas. The bottom two are not good, and Erik will give you more information on that shortly. That 72 hours is, as of December 2018, now being expanded to 14 days. Realistically, I cannot carry 14 days worth of food and water, plus water filtration, dry clothes, weather protection, etc. So my plan is to maintain my 72-hour kit and supplement with a 14-day supply of food and water that is stored in an area not likely to be affected by the natural disasters with the highest probability for where I live. That means it's not in the basement. Let's look at some specific questions to consider. You don't need to worry about trying to write down all of the questions on these upcoming slides because these and more are in the handout. And please don't panic as I go through these. Remember, these are just some examples of things you may want to consider. How much water do you have? Ways to purify it? Places to get more? Ways to purify the more water? Please don't fall into the trap of thinking that if you have a well, you will always have good, clean water. Wells require pumps that use electricity, and they are often cut off or at least contaminated by earthquakes. The same goes for home septic systems. Have you got food? How about for your animals? Do you have ways to protect your food from hungry animals? Rodents can, will, and do chew through even number 10 cans, metal garbage cans, and plastic buckets containing sealed metallized mylar bags with food in them to get at the stored food. How will you keep them out? Medications. This would include a supply of prescription medications anywhere anyone in your family needs, as well as the over-counter allergy, pain relief, cough, etc. Are there any you need now or might need later for fighting infections, radiation from a nuclear incident, or anything else? And again, how about for any animals you have? Warm clothing. And by this, I mean really warm, like able to keep you warm in sub-zero weather or heavy rain with shelter only from the wind. How about fuel? Heat. Is it stored safely? Is it rotated? Sanitation. You have some options for hand soap. Do you know the difference between hand soap and sanitizer? Do you have a foot pump operated hand washing station? How about a long-term substitute for toilet paper, tampons, feminine napkins? Do you have cloth diapers, handkerchiefs, cloth napkins? How about laundry? Not just soap, but also a way to wash clothes and then dry them. And dishes. You can't eat on disposables forever. Speaking of sanitation, what are you going to do with all of the human waste? You can only bury so much in your backyard before you run out of places to dig trenches or pits for it. What are you going to do with all of the food in your fridge and freezer when the power goes away for a very, very, very long time, say 6 months to a year or more? Do you know how to preserve that food with little or no gas or electricity? Can you dehydrate it without electricity? How about smoking, brining, and pickling food? What's your plan for home defense? If you believe Jesus or the Book of Mormon taught pacifism, there are some great quotes in the handouts for you to check out, and they are not comprehensive. How about a neighborhood safety patrol? What are your relationships like with your neighbors? How will you communicate with your neighbors, especially between the patrols and the homes? Speaking of communications, how will you communicate with distant family members who either cannot or will not join you? What sources of light do you have? And do you have a way to black out your windows at night if you use light inside? Why might that be important? Have you checked to see how well your blackout plans really work? Go through your home and make a list of every single disposable item you use. Do you have a way to deal with that need long term without going shopping and replenishing your supplies? First of all, make a 5-column list like this, or just print off the one in the handouts. Walk through your home, open every cabinet, every cupboard, every closet, every drawer. Check every shelf, file cabinet, your pantry, workshop area, garage, garden shed, etc. Make a list of everything you come across that you can or do periodically use up and need to replace. This must be done as a walkthrough. Trust me when I say that unless you are one of the very rare people blessed with a photographic memory, making this list from memory will result in needed items being missed or forgotten. Last, or fourth, sit down with the list and consider or discuss what alternatives you might be able to use or plan to use that don't require replacement. Decide how much of each alternative you need. Compare that to what you have. Are you okay, or do you need more? Up until now, I have mostly talked about stuff, but how about your skill sets? Do you know how to cook nutritious and tasty meals from any food you have stored? Do you know how to increase the vitamin and enzyme content of your stored foods? Do you know how to turn powdered milk into cheese, cream cheese, yogurt, kefir, etc.? How about baby formula? How much food can you realistically grow on your land, both in terms of space and water? Do you have seeds? Do you know how to save seeds from one year to the next? Do you know the difference between hybrid, open pollinated, and heirloom varieties? Why is that important? Do you have gardening tools? Do you know how to repair and or make gardening tools? Do you have basic hand tools that will allow you to build and or repair without electricity? Do you have the skills to repair or replace those tools when they fail or simply need a bit of touch-up? Do you know how to butcher animals, tan hides, spin wool, knit the yarn into usable clothing, cut and sew leather into usable clothing? One final thing, there are 2 videos on YouTube that we enjoy watching, too many times maybe, for ideas on things we need to work on. And it's also fun to look at the occasional bad advice that is contained in them. I'd challenge you to see if you can spot that bad advice. Okay, any questions on sheltering in at this moment?
That was so great. I think everybody's like rapidly writing as quickly as they possibly can. They haven't had time to type any questions.
Okay.
Because they're writing as fast as they possibly can to get all the information down. So nothing at the moment that I have come through.
I'll hand the headset over to Erik and let him go on with his part of the presentation.
Perfect. Oh, actually, we do have one quick question just for apartment living. Anything specific in regards to that?
Suzanne, I'm getting a question here. Anything specific to apartment living?
You know what your situation is and how much space you have. It's obviously you can't garden, but you can grow sprouts in your kitchen. If you have room on a table, you may be able to grow some fresh salad greens. There are things that you can do in an apartment situation. Erik and I spent the first couple of years of our marriage in a small apartment. If you want to email me specifically, I can give you some more specific advice beyond that.
Great, thank you. Okay, Erik, you're up.
All righty. If you can hear me okay, I will get started. I'm allergic to fire hoses, so I thought I would just tell you a story today, but it needs an introduction. I've been asked to speak about grid down evacuation. We need to define those terms. The grid is the wires, towers, generators, and transformers that supply our homes and businesses with electricity. Grid down means the destruction of the electricity infrastructure so that there is no electrical power for a prolonged period of time. Evacuation means changing location ASAP, bugging out, getting out of Dodge. Why would the grid fail? There are three primary causes. This can happen because of a solar flare. This is called a Carrington event. It can happen because of terrorist attack. They know how vulnerable our electrical system is. Or it can happen as a result of nuclear war. Most of the plans for World War III include taking down the enemy's electrical system at the beginning of the war. Cities process and consume food, but they don't produce it. Food comes from farms and ranches. No electricity means no lights, no heat, no water, no security systems, no fuel for your vehicles, no semis bringing food, medicine, or commodities, no stores or service stations open, no banks, no internet, no phone service, no television, no radio stations, no hospitals, no public transportation, no police, and no garbage pickup or sanitation. So grid down evacuation means an emergency exit without the benefit of any normal systems working. It's a tough problem. Here's the story. Sit back and relax. Once upon a time, there was a guy named Jack who lived in the suburbs of a big city. His wife, Jill, lived with him, along with their two children. They had a nice house and a pretty yard. Jack had a good job and a comfortable income. And while Jack and Jill believed in being prepared, they had never done much about it. One day, the electricity went off. "Oh, darn," said Jack. "I hope it comes back on in time for my favorite show." That night, the electricity didn't come back on, and their family slept very cold. They would have called the power company to complain, but the phones didn't work. They would have gone to stay with relatives, but the car wouldn't start. They would have thought, since they were on propane, the furnace would still work, but the furnace had a blower that required electricity and wouldn't come on without it. They kept warm for a couple of hours by the activity of running all around the house looking for more bedding, and kept from freezing the rest of the night by cuddling up, all four of them, in the same bed. Jack was very surprised the next day when the power still didn't come back on. He was surprised to learn that the blackout extended as far as they could see across the city. He was surprised that the phone still didn't work. The biggest surprise was when the water pressure dropped. "What's wrong with these idiots?" said Jack. "I need to take a shower. I need to flush the toilet. How could they let this happen?" "I need to fix lunch and do the laundry," contributed Jill to the conversation. "The fridge is warm and the milk is sour," complained the children. But Jack and Jill got along as best they could for a week. Then, too, dreams of triumphing in a reality TV survival show dancing in their heads, alternating with nightmares of starving to death. On the whole, though, their world had changed, and they no longer thought they were in a very good place. Then one night there was a knock at the door. "Tell them we're out of food too," said Jill. "And we drank all the water from the fish tank," added one of the children between dry heaves. Jack opened the door and four men pushed their way in. They knocked Jack to the floor and smashed his head with a crowbar, leaving him for dead. The bandits grabbed Jill and the children and dragged them down the hall. When Jack regained consciousness, he could hear screaming coming from somewhere in the house. He staggered into his workshop, blood still running down his face, and sat at the console of the time machine. Turning it on and throwing it into reverse, he eased all the world but himself into the past. 1 minute, 30 minutes, an hour, the screaming stopped. Suddenly, Jack understood. A man can have no destiny for which he is not prepared. And the fundamental dimension of preparedness is time. "How far shall I go?" he muttered to himself, still dazed by the blow from the crowbar. "How much time do I need?" His stomach growled, but after 2 weeks he was so used to that he didn't hear it. Time travel isn't cheap. Jack thought about the fuel supply in the 5-dimensional vortex engine. He thought about his checking account 2 months ago. I can make it to -2 months, he said to himself. 2 months will be enough, and then I'll buy the fuel I need to make this trip and install a second fuel tank. The pitch of the temporal carburetor ramped up. Sunlight flashed from the window 60 times, and then everything was still. Jack stood up from the console and walked into the kitchen. It was mid-morning. "What did you do?" gasped Jill, seeing the blood-covered shirt and matted hair. "I thought you were at work." "What's the date today?" asked Jack. Jill drove Jack to the hospital for stitches, but his mind wasn't on the stitches. She drove him to his work, but he didn't go in. Kissing Jill with emotion he could not conceal, he got in his car and drove to the sporting goods store for a gun, a backpack, and assorted other supplies, and books. Lots of books on camping, hiking, survival, firearms, self-defense, home repair, trapping, gardening, first aid. The list went on, and the more he read, the more he realized what else there was he needed to know. In the days that followed, there were more shopping trips: the pharmacy, the bulk food store, the bicycle shop, the hardware store. Jack's first project was to install one-way peepholes in both the front and back doors and put longer screws into the latch plates. He would never again open a door without knowing in advance who was on the other side of it. But it was obvious he could not defend his family for long in the city under the conditions he now knew were coming. "The best defense is a good absence," he said. "We will need to leave. We need a bug-out home, someplace in the country where we will be welcome, have allies, and more natural resources like water." Fortunately for Jack, Jill had an uncle, the family kook, holed up on a weedy little ranch in a canyon in the south part of the state. All of a sudden, Uncle John and Aunt Jody didn't seem so deranged after all. After a phone call to ask if they could come, Jack and his family drove down to talk about contingency plans with Uncle John. They left with an agreement, a heightened sense of trust, and Jack began to pre-position food and supplies at the ranch. He and Jill wanted to be an asset and not a burden. On the news one night, there was an odd story about the pending travel restrictions. Jack had forgotten about the lockdown. It hadn't affected him the first time because he had no need to leave town. But as he began to plan a preemptive escape to the country by car, he remembered that the city had been placed on bizarre travel restrictions just before the power outage. There would be roadblocks. Maps showed there were hiking trails that skirted the checkpoints, but was it feasible to hike to Uncle John's? For Jack, yes. For Jill and the children, probably not. Then it hit him. He had purchased bicycles for the whole family, for their after-the-crunch transportation. Every bicycle had a luggage rack and carried its own repair kit. Jack's bike had a trailer that converted to a handcart. Jack knew that the bicycle was the most energy-efficient form of transportation in existence, and that a person could go at least 5 times as far on a bicycle in a day as they could by walking. That's it. We will bicycle to Uncle John's. We can do it in 2 days. The wheels began to turn. Uh-oh, 2 days on a bicycle without being used to it? We had better get in shape. The Red Cross coined the term 72-hour kit because their experience was that it took them about 3 days in a crisis to find all the refugees. This meant the people needed to be prepared to provide their own emergency supplies for that long, and it needed to be mobile in case they were displaced. "We're going to need 72-hour kits," Jack announced the next morning. "What's a 72-hour kit?" asked the children. "Where will you buy those?" asked Jill. "We can't buy them," said Jack. "We have to make our own." "But I've seen them in catalogs," protested Jill. "That's what they call them, but that's not what they are. The purveyors of those kits don't know anything about you, not even what part of the country you live in. They couldn't possibly assemble a kit optimized for you. Shoe size, coat size, clothing needs, medications, eyeglass prescription, dietary preferences, dietary restrictions, skill set, responsibilities. They don't know any of that about you. Jill was silent. It made perfect sense. Jack continued. 72-hour kits are synonymous with evacuation. Look at this definition I found. The 72-hour kit must be something you can carry traveling on foot on short notice in an evacuation from which you may or may not return. It is the elite of your tools, the cream of your supplies, the condensation of whatever life-sustaining and empowering substances your skill and knowledge can assemble. It is leanly that and nothing more, so composed and sufficiently limited as to maximize the likelihood it will without fail go with you when you are pushed out, never taxing your ability or willingness to carry it. There are some very popular ways to do it wrong, however. You should start with a backpack that is the right size for each person, because you must be able to carry your stuff with your hands free. Put in your pack the things you think you will need to sustain yourself for 3 days and the things that will enable you to fulfill your responsibilities. Can I just use a suitcase, Rubbermaid tote, or a 5-gallon bucket? Asked Jill. No, my dear, said Jack gently. 5-gallon buckets are wonderful containers, but not for a 72-hour kit. The container must not be something that slows you down, throws you off balance, strains your back, or that gets in the way of walking or running. How far would you get carrying a, say, 25-pound bucket? 25 pounds in a backpack is easy for most adults, but carrying 25 pounds in a bucket would get old fast. Our children cannot carry 25-pound packs, said Jill. No, said Jack. Young children cannot be expected to fully provision themselves, but they can help. It will help them cope with the stress of the evacuation, to feel the empowerment of helping and being self-sustaining. It needs to become a familiar part of their childhood training. Jack made sure each family member had their own 72-hour kit, also known as a bug-out bag. A duffel bag with a shoulder strap can work, but a backpack will give you greater endurance. Either way, having both hands free to do other things is essential.
Eric, real quick, just if you
Well,
could
what's
speak
in
a
a
little
bug-out bag?
louder. Eric, if you could just speak a little louder, we just have a request to have you speak up a bit.
All righty, is this better?
Yes, much. Thank you.
What do we need? Specialized equipment? Asked Jill. It's not about macho survival gear, said Jack. It's simply about meeting our usual needs under unusual circumstances. For instance, we will need to keep our group in constant communication. For that, we will have walkie-talkies with spare batteries, notebook and pencil, signal mirror, whistle, laser pointer perhaps, contact information, shared plans, some cash for communicating with the merchants, and a few simple code words for keeping our business private in the presence of persons we may not trust. We will need to see. It's dark half the time, and it's dangerous not to be able to see. Spare eyeglasses, hat to shade eyes from the sun, headlamps and flashlights, batteries, more batteries, binoculars perhaps. Look at this picture from Hurricane Katrina and try to get a sense of how important shoes are. Whatever else fails, we must remain mobile, and that means able to walk and keep walking. Hiking shoes, warm socks, moleskin for blisters, toenail clippers, maps. We must maintain body temperature. Each kit will contain one complete change of dry clothing, rain gear, gloves, cold weather clothing. In 3 days' time, it is certain we will have to sleep. We will have sleeping bags and backpackers' tents enough for everyone. It won't be the Taj Mahal because we have to carry them, but we will survive, and when the time comes, we will be glad to have them. We must stay hydrated. Water in Nalgene bottles, water filters, purification tablets. Jack thought about the fish tank, but that was not in anyone's memory but his. We have to eat cereal, dried fruit and nuts, compact, high nutrition foods that store well and travel well. We must eliminate waste and wash regularly, at least our hands and face. So we will include tissue, wet wipes, a washcloth, small towel, travel size shampoo. Accidents are always possible. A small first aid kit in every pack and a more substantial one for the group. To prevent injuries, helmets, durable clothing, long pants, long sleeves, and leather gloves when on the bicycles. We will likely need to make repairs and improvise a variety of things we cannot anticipate. A pocket knife, knife sharpener, paracord, 5-minute epoxy, Gorilla tape, multi-tool, a sewing kit. Still, we must be very selective, and it isn't a good idea to take everything we think we might need. Every ounce counts, as they say. Always we will be asking, how can I make my bug out ensemble lighter, smaller, more efficient? Fire is basic. We may have to make fire. Each kit will include matches, candles, ferrocerium rod, dry tinder, and petroleum jelly as a fire starter. There, that's easy enough, isn't it? Said Jack. Let's go for a bicycle ride. The end. Now, dear listener, if you, like Jack, have a time machine, you may get a second chance at the next crisis. If you don't have a time machine, then one chance is all you get, and you will want to do it as well as you possibly can the first time. Your family is counting on you. Never stop preparing.
Love it. I'm pretty sure you have a radio voice. you could do this.
Anyone have any questions?
All right. I'm just waiting to see.
Questions or comments?
That was amazing. I have a comment. Good job. Just waiting for comments to come through. They were so enthralled they didn't have time to type questions. What I loved is that it went through everything that we have to think about, because a lot of times the challenge is even knowing where to start. And that really gives an idea. Someone just asked, where do we buy the time machine? So right now, this is the time machine, basically. All right, some questions here. How do I find others that want to do this? You still there?
Me.
There we go. Now you're back on.
Okay.
So question was, how do we find others that want to do this?
As somebody once said, I don't know, and you can quote me, but it's a problem that most of us could begin to work on. You have acquaintances, you know, friends. There may be websites where you could start exploring that question. I would say probably, first of all, start with the people you know who think pretty much the same way you do about this stuff, and ask them about their relatives and friends, and just let it branch out until you find somebody to be your buddy. You know, there's a concept in swimming. You put two kids together and you say, this is your buddy. And when we blow the whistle, the two of you grab each other and you hold your hands up so that we know that everybody is still paired off and everybody has somebody to watch out for them. Well, you need a family buddy. And the interesting thing is the tendency in this area, at least, is for children to grow up and leave home. So all of these families who are living in rural areas, the kids move to the city, but when the time comes they need a place of refuge, they'll go back home. And there are a lot of senior people in rural areas who could very much use the help of a young couple moving back in with them in an emergency, providing the strength that they no longer have, and just helping out with the chores, with the work, with the vigilance. It has been said by people that know a lot more about this than I do that a couple, two people cannot guard a residence around the clock. It takes 4 to 6 people just to provide the watchfulness around the clock that is needed under the worst of conditions. So if you can put 2 families or 4 families together, they will have a much higher chance of surviving the really bad times. So find them now while you still have the resources to go looking, and make your plans, have your talks, your discussions. Almost never will 2 people see eye to eye on everything, but with enough discussion, if you start with the right people, you can work out a good plan where everybody helps everybody and everybody gets through it.
Eric,
And you'll need a diversity of skills.
Eric, a question about food. And is there any type of high density food that you would recommend for your kids?
Well, I have a saying, learn from the experts. So you look around and you see who's doing something really well. And it's my understanding that one of the favorite things with the guys in the military is grape nuts. They get tired of the MREs, which are excellent, and they'll have the folks send them grape nuts from home, and eat that. You eat it dry if you've got enough water to drink along with it. But you know, you go into the grocery store, you buy a jar of roasted peanuts, cookies, crackers. If you're addicted to chocolate, this is another topic, but it's an important one, I think. Most people who have 72-hour kits don't even know where they are. And they sit up on the hilltop watching the floodwaters, and somebody says, don't we have 72-hour kits somewhere? Yeah, they're in the basement. So make it part of your daily routine. If you've got an empty chair in your bedroom, let that become the natural residence of your 72-hour kit. And if you're addicted to chocolate, that's where you keep your chocolate. It's in the 72-hour kit. So somebody says, are you getting into the chocolate again? Oh, I'm just recycling my supplies. You know, there are a lot of benefits to having this backpack part of your daily routine.
Great. All right, we have 2 minutes left. So I have one question for Suzanne. Would you recommend a generator, and which one?
Let me hand it back to Suzanne. That we're using earbuds and we have to share here.
Okay, I'm on now and can hear. So what was the question? Why did Eric hand me the headphone?
Would you recommend a generator, and if so, which one?
I haven't really researched generators. It's a good idea, but it's a very short-term source of energy because they require fuel of some type, gasoline or propane, something of that sort, and it's going to run out.
Got it. Good question.
Hey, this is Dave here. It's a really simple answer. It's the Honda EU 2000. It's the quiet generator that has the electronic controls, so you got really good voltage regulation. And they sell kits now that you can take a marine like 5 or more gallon tank and attach it to the generator, and it'll run for a very, very long time. The point usually is not so much that you're putting out a lot of power. You want something that's going to be as miserly as possible on the gasoline while still putting out good pure sine wave power. Back to you.
Love it. Thank you.